She's only 5. Take me instead. The voice cut through the rumble of engines in the dark alley of Terran's docks. Searchlights scorched the concrete, casting long shadows that danced like hungry ghosts across worn walls. Rain fell in thin, acidic droplets, stinging exposed skin and leaving small burns on unprotected surfaces. Michael stood clutching a metal data container, its cold surface digging into his palm, the weight of its contents far heavier than its physical mass. His weathered face, lined with scars from years of service, betrayed no emotion, but his eyes, sharp, alert, took in every detail of the scene unfolding before him. Before him stood a woman with pale blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Her silver hair, once perhaps elegant and flowing, now hung in tattered strands around a face marked by hardship and fear. Her clothes, torn and stained, spoke of weeks on the run, yet there was dignity in how she stood between the armed guards and her child, a fierce protectiveness that transcended species. Her daughter, tiny Lily with skin the color of a clear morning sky, trembled as a guard grabbed her thin arm. The guard's massive hand nearly encircled her entire upper arm, his fingers digging cruelly into her soft flesh. With casual brutality, he threw her into the dirt. She made no sound as she fell, having learned that silence was safer than crying. Her large, luminous eyes, filled with a wisdom no 5-year-old should possess, found her mother's face and held on as if it were her only anchor in a storm. "Let her go," Michael growled, stepping forward. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, a remnant from his days in Tehran's security forces. The rain intensified, droplets sizzling as they hit the heated barrels of the guard's weapons. The guard, a hulking figure with a face pockmarked by radiation burns, smiled, revealing teeth filed to points, a common modification among Relcor's enforcers meant to intimidate. He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the alley walls like breaking bones. "Back off, human. This isn't your business. The Blueskins are property of Relcor. Escaped property." Michael's hand moved with practiced precision. The gun appeared in his grip as if conjured from air, its weight familiar and reassuring. Time slowed as he aimed. One breath, one heartbeat, and fired. The sound cracked through the alley, bouncing between the walls, momentarily drowning out the constant hum of machinery that formed the heartbeat of Terran. The guard's expression shifted from arrogant confidence to surprise as a dark hole appeared in his forehead. His body fell, a puppet with cut strings, spilling dark purple blood across the cobblestones. The metallic smell of it mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder and rain. Mother and child froze, their eyes wide, bodies tensed for flight or further violence. The mother instinctively pulled her daughter behind her, shielding the child with her body. "Come on, before others arrive," Michael said curtly, holstering his weapon beneath his worn jacket. He glanced at the dead guard, feeling nothing. One more death in a city built on corpses. They travel in packs. More will come when he doesn't report in. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between Michael and the body, calculating risks with the speed of someone whose survival depended on making the right choice in moments of crisis. "I don't know you," she said, her voice melodic despite its edge of suspicion. "Why would you help us?" Michael checked the alley entrance, his movements efficient, wasting no energy. "No time for that now. Trust me or don't, but decide quickly." The distant wail of a security siren emphasized his words. "That's for him," he added, nodding toward the body cooling in the rain. The woman made her decision, cooping up her daughter in one fluid motion. "Lead the way." They ran through narrow service corridors, the kind that existed in the forgotten spaces between Terran's official pathways. The air smelled of burning circuits and oxidized metal, the neglected veins of a city slowly decaying from within. Water dripped from rusted pipes overhead, occasionally sparking against exposed wiring. Michael navigated with the confidence of someone returning to familiar territory, turning at seemingly random intervals, avoiding the cameras that blinked like malevolent red eyes from corners and junctions. Terran existed primarily underground, a sprawling metropolis born from necessity after the surface became uninhabitable. Its upper sectors gleamed with Relcor Corporation domes, pristine, climate-controlled environments where the privileged lived in artificial daylight and breathed filtered air. Below lay the reality of Tehran, poverty, smoke-filled corridors, and packs of feral humans and other species fighting for scraps in the shadows cast by corporate towers. Nora ran, holding Lily's hand when the passages widened enough to set her down, stumbling occasionally on uneven flooring or debris. Her breathing came in short, controlled bursts, conserving energy with each inhale. The child moved with surprising agility, her small legs pumping to keep up, her free hand occasionally brushing against the damp walls for balance. Neither complained about the pace, another sign of lives spent running. Michael led the way through a labyrinth few could navigate, relying on knowledge gained during his time serving in city security, before his conscience became inconvenient, before he saw too much. At each junction, he paused briefly, listening for the echoing footsteps of pursuers or the mechanical whir of security drones. After nearly an hour of navigating the Undercity's maze, they reached an abandoned pumping station. Once vital to Terran's water recycling system, it had been superseded by newer technology and left to rust. Michael secured the heavy door behind them, throwing the ancient manual bolt into place. The space was cavernous, with massive pipes running along walls and across ceilings, occasionally disappearing into concrete. Old machinery stood like silent sentinels, covered in dust and corrosion. Water pooled on the uneven floor, reflecting the dim emergency lights that still functioned on backup power. "We should be safe here for now," Michael said, finally allowing himself to relax marginally. He placed the data container carefully on a dry section of an old control panel before turning to inspect their temporary shelter more thoroughly. Nora set Lily down on a relatively clean section of floor, crouching to check her daughter for injuries. The child's blue skin showed several bruises, darkened to a deep indigo where rough hands had grabbed her. Nora's touch was gentle as she pushed back Lily's silver hair, examining a small cut on her forehead. Her fingers trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the fear and rage she kept contained. "Why are you helping us?" Nora asked again, not looking up from tending to her daughter. Her voice carried a weight of suspicion born from experience. "Humans don't usually intervene when Relcor takes one of us." Michael was checking the perimeter, testing old access panels and examining potential escape routes. He paused, his back to them. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch," he replied briefly. The words clipped as if each one cost him something to reveal. He didn't look at her as he spoke, continuing his inspection of their surroundings. Lily's eyes followed Michael's movements, tracking him like a small animal might watch a larger predator, uncertain if it represented danger or protection. She hadn't spoken a word since their escape, but her gaze missed nothing. "Your former security," Nora observed, noting the way he moved, how he checked sightlines, his familiarity with Terran's hidden architecture. "What changed?" Michael found an old emergency kit bolted to a wall and pried it open. Inside were basic medical supplies, untouched for years but still sealed and usable. He brought it to Nora before answering. "I saw what Relcor was doing to your people. And others." His voice dropped lower, roughened by memory. "I followed orders for too long, until I couldn't anymore." He turned away again, the conversation clearly over from his perspective. "There should be enough supplies here to last a few days. I'll secure the other entrances." For 3 days, they hid among the ruins of the pumping station, establishing a tense routine. Michael ventured out once daily, navigating the treacherous paths to the lower sector market. There, among the desperate and dangerous, he traded small parts salvaged from his weapon. A firing pin, a trigger assembly, an optical sight, for dry rations and purified water. Each trip carried increasing risk as Relcor flooded the Undercity with wanted notices, his face appearing on cracked screens and holographic projectors alongside images of the blue-skinned fugitives. During his absence, Nora explored their shelter, discovering old maintenance tools and forgotten supplies. She fashioned a more comfortable sleeping area for Lily from discarded insulation materials and created a rudimentary alarm system using salvaged pressure plates near the entrances. Her ingenuity impressed Michael, though he said nothing, merely noting the improvements with a slight nod upon his return. Nora treated his wounds each evening, cleaning them with filtered water and applying antiseptic from the emergency kit. The bullet graze on his arm from their initial escape was healing well, the skin puckering around the edges of the wound. Her touch was clinical, but gentle, her blue fingers working with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before," Michael observed during one such session. "I was a medical technician," she replied, applying a fresh bandage. "Before Relcor decided my people were more valuable as research subjects than as professionals." The silence that followed held the weight of unsaid horrors. Lily didn't speak during these days, only watched as they moved through darkness, her large eyes reflecting the sparse light. She helped in small ways, organizing supplies, fetching tools for her mother, standing guard at windows during Michael's absences. Once, she silently handed him a small mechanism she'd assembled from discarded parts, a crude but functional motion detector. He accepted it with surprise, testing its sensitivity before placing it near one of the secondary entrances. "Your daughter is resourceful," he told Nora that night. They shared a meager meal of reconstituted protein. "She had to become so," Nora replied, watching Lily sketch patterns in dust nearby. "Children adapt more quickly than adults. Sometimes I think that's both a blessing and a tragedy." When Michael slept, usually in short bursts while sitting upright against a wall, he dreamed of the dock scene, the guard's eyes widening in that final moment of realization, the child's silent scream as she hit the ground. Sometimes in the dreams, he wasn't fast enough, and he watched as they were taken, his body frozen and useless. He would wake with a barely suppressed gasp, hand automatically reaching for his weapon, finding no peace even in unconsciousness. On the third night after confirming Lily was asleep, Michael retrieved a small communications device from a hidden pocket in his jacket. Ancient technology, predating Relcor's monitoring systems, it connected to forgotten networks still humming beneath Terran's newer infrastructure. He contacted Trevor, an old acquaintance, former service buddy, now a smuggler specializing in moving people and goods off-world. The connection crackled with static, the encrypted channel struggling to maintain integrity. "You're in trouble, Michael." Trevor's voice came through, distorted but recognizable. "The corporation is already looking for you. Priority target, shoot on sight. But I can help, for a price, Von." Michael glanced at Nora's sleeping form, curled protectively around her daughter. "I don't sell people." "Never said you should," Trevor replied, a smile evident in his voice. "But data can be sold. That container you're carrying is worth a life, maybe several." Michael's hand instinctively went to the container hidden beneath his jacket. "How do you know about that?" "Information is my business, old friend, and that particular piece is burning up the secure channels. Relcor executives are personally overseeing the search. Whatever's in there has them scared." Michael considered this information, weighing options against risks. "Can you get us off-world?" "Us? So it's like that, is it?" Trevor chuckled. "Always the hero. Meet me tomorrow. Old maintenance hangar B-47, Lower East Sector, midnight, come alone first. If I'm satisfied with what you're offering, I'll arrange transport for your blue companions too." Michael cut the channel without answering, the decision already made in his mind. As he tucked the communicator away, he noticed Nora's eyes on him, open and alert in the darkness. "You don't have to take us with you," she said quietly. "We've survived this long. The data is what matters." "I made my choice at the docks," Michael replied, settling back against the wall, closing his eyes to end the conversation. But sleep eluded him for hours, his mind racing through contingencies and escape routes, calculating odds of survival that grew increasingly slim. They met in an old hangar the following night, the massive space mostly empty, save for a few abandoned shuttle parts and rusty maintenance equipment. Michael arrived first, securing the perimeter before signaling Nora and Lily to join him. They waited in tense silence, Lily pressed against her mother's side, her small fingers clutching a makeshift knife fashioned from scrap metal, a detail that didn't escape Michael's notice. Trevor arrived precisely at midnight, emerging from shadows as if materialized from the darkness itself. He looked confident, hands casually tucked into the pockets of an expensive-looking jacket, its material shimmering slightly with embedded tech, active camouflage, perhaps, or personal shielding. His face bore the same easy smile Michael remembered, but his eyes were harder than they had been years ago, calculating in a way that set off warning signals in Michael's mind. "Right on time," Trevor said, glancing past Michael to where Nora and Lily stood. "I see you brought friends after all." "Touching." "The terms," Michael cut in, not interested in banter. "What do you need to make this happen?" Trevor's smile widened. "Hand over the container, and you'll get a ticket on a cargo ship. All three of you. Leaves tomorrow at dawn for the outer colonies. Relcor has no jurisdiction there. You'll be ghosts." Nora stood silently behind Michael, one protective hand on Lily's shoulder. The child's eyes never left Trevor, her small body tense as if preparing to run or fight. What's in the container? Michael asked, making no move to retrieve it from inside his jacket. Trevor shrugged. Does it matter? It's valuable to Relcor, which makes it valuable to me. The less you know, the better for everyone. Evidence, Nora answered quietly, her voice carrying in the empty space. Experiments on my people. Genetic manipulation. Biological weapons development using our cellular structure as a foundation. Her fingers tightened slightly on Lily's shoulder. They're attempting to weaponize our natural regenerative abilities. Turn healing into destruction. Trevor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of discomfort quickly suppressed. Like I said, the less you know. This isn't just about escaping, Nora continued, her voice stronger now. The data needs to reach the Colonial Authority. They need to know what Relcor is doing here. How many of my people have disappeared into their laboratories? How many children? Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard before continuing. How many children have been taken for their purity of genetic material? Trevor laughed, the sound echoing hollowly in the cavernous space. The Colonial Authority? They're in Relcor's pocket, have been for decades. He shook his head, looking at Michael with something between pity and amusement. This isn't your war, friend. But if you want heroism, die ingloriously. It makes no difference to the universe. He turned, moving toward the exit. My offer stands until dawn. The container for your passage. I'll be at Docking Bay 12. After that, you're on your own. The shadows seemed to embrace him as he walked away, his figure blending into darkness. Michael watched him go, feeling the weight of the container against his chest, knowing they were now targets, not just for Relcor, but potentially for Trevor's network as well. The space between allies and enemies had shrunk to nearly nothing. Can we trust him? Nora asked once Trevor was gone, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael checked his weapon, ensuring the chamber was loaded. No, but we might not have a choice. Search drones appeared in the Undercity that evening, their distinctive whirring cutting through the ambient noise of machinery and distant voices. Sleek, spherical devices equipped with advanced scanning technology and non-lethal immobilization weapons. They moved with artificial intelligence precision, methodically sweeping each sector. Their spotlights combed the streets and abandoned structures, casting harsh white illumination into spaces that hadn't seen light in years. The underground levels hummed with sirens and automated announcements offering rewards for information leading to the capture of the fugitives. Michael recognized the pattern of the search, a technique he had once helped develop. They were being methodical, sealing off sections completely before moving to the next. Soon there would be nowhere left to hide in the Undercity. They ran through maintenance shafts and forgotten quarters, Michael leading the way with an internal map born of years patrolling these levels. They jumped over exposed pipes hissing with steam, ducked under low-hanging electrical conduits crackling with energy, hid behind debris and abandoned machinery when drones passed too close. Nora carried Lily when the child's strength flagged, her maternal strength seemingly inexhaustible despite her own exhaustion. Once they nearly walked into a patrol of human guards. Michael pulled them back just in time, pressing them into a recessed doorway as heavy boots marched past, so close they could smell the guards' sweat and the oil from their weapons. Lily made no sound. Ancien, her small body trembling against her mother's, her discipline remarkable for one so young. They spent that night in an old subway tunnel, long abandoned after a section of Terran had been deemed structurally unsound and sealed off. The air was stale but breathable. The darkness nearly complete save for the faint bioluminescent glow emanating from patches of fungus growing along the walls. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional distant rumble of machinery or the skittering of small creatures that had adapted to life in perpetual darkness. Nora lit a small fire with plastic fragments gathered along their escape route, trying to warm Lily, whose blue skin had taken on a concerning grayish tinge, a sign of hypothermia in her species. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces, highlighting the exhaustion etched into every line. We can't keep running, Nora said, arranging her tattered jacket around Lily's shoulders. The child had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep sleep. They'll find us, eventually. Terran is sealed. No one gets in or out without Relcor's knowledge. Michael sat across from them, his back against the curved tunnel wall, weapon resting across his knees. The firelight caught in his eyes reflecting like banked embers. You could have escaped alone, she said, studying his face, without us slowing you down. With just the data, you might have made it out already. And leave you? Michael's voice was rough with fatigue. A humorless smile briefly touched his lips. I might be scum, but not that much. Why do you say that? Nora asked, her head tilted slightly in genuine curiosity. That you're scum? Michael was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the small fire. Because I helped build this, he finally said, gesturing vaguely to encompass not just their current situation, but the entire system that had created it. I was security division leadership. I signed off on operations that... He stopped, jaw tightening. I told myself I was just following orders, protecting Terran's citizens. But I always knew what was happening in those labs. To your people, to others. But you left, Nora observed. You chose differently in the end. Too late for many. His eyes met hers across the fire. Well, too late for you and Lily, if I can help it. They fell into silence after that, each lost in private thoughts as the fire slowly died to embers, then ash. In the morning, they encountered a group of refugees living in an abandoned reactor block, a forgotten section of Terran's original power generation system. The radiation had long since decayed to safe levels, but the fear of it kept most people, including Relcor security, away. The group had made a home in the massive concrete structure, creating a small, self-sufficient community in the shadow of the dead reactor. They were led by Sarah, a thin, tortured woman with hands scratched and calloused from years of hard survival. Her face bore the distinctive scarring of someone who had undergone and rejected Relcor's enhancement procedures. Failed experiments often ended up in the Undercity, cast off like broken tools. Her eyes held the wariness of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust easily. We don't trust strangers, she said, pointing a homemade rifle at Michael as they were brought before her. A circle of refugees surrounded them, some holding makeshift weapons, others simply watching with hollow eyes. They were a mix of species, humans, blueskins like Nora, and others Michael couldn't immediately identify. All bore the marks of hardship and survival. We don't have much choice either, Michael replied, making no move toward his weapon, hands held slightly away from his body in a universal gesture of non-aggression. We need shelter, just for a day or two. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she assessed them, lingering on Lily, who stood partially hidden behind Nora's legs. Something in the woman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She lowered her weapon, though she didn't put it away entirely. Fine, she said after a moment of consideration, but you'll work if you stay. Everyone contributes here, and if you bring trouble down on us, she left the threat unfinished but clear. The reactor community operated on strict principles of cooperation and shared resources. Despite initial suspicion, they were assigned sleeping quarters, a small room once used for monitoring equipment, now furnished with salvaged bedding, and a heating unit that functioned intermittently. Lily was welcomed by the few other children in the community, mostly orphans taken in by the group, and for the first time since Michael had met her, he saw her smile as she was invited to join their play. In the shelter's communal area, Sarah showed Michael a detailed map spread across what had once been a control console. The faded schematic showed a section of Tehran few knew existed, maintenance systems dating back to the city's foundation. There's an old elevator shaft here, she explained, her finger tapping a location marked in faded red. It leads directly to the Quadris orbital port. It was used for moving heavy equipment during Terran's construction, before the main lifts were operational. Michael studied the map intently, memorizing details, calculating distances. Is it still functional? Sarah shook her head. Power was cut decades ago when the port was redesigned. But the shaft is intact. You could restore limited functionality if you know what you're doing. She gave him an assessing look. I'm guessing you do. I can make it work, Michael confirmed. But you said there's still security? Automated systems mostly. Relcor keeps minimal human presence at the port itself. Too expensive to maintain personnel off-world for extended periods. But the security AI is top tier. Once you trigger an alert, you'll have minutes at most before armed response arrives from the city. Michael nodded, already forming a plan. I'll need access to your tool storage and any spare power cells you can spare. For the next day, Michael worked tirelessly on preparations. He checked generators salvaged from deeper levels, looked for compatible cables among the community's stockpile of parts, connected power units manually to test outputs. The work was precise and demanding, requiring both physical strength and technical knowledge. Several times he had to modify components to work with systems they weren't designed for, improvising solutions with limited resources. Nora helped, her medical training giving her an understanding of precise work and careful measurements. They developed an unspoken rhythm, passing tools without needing to ask, anticipating each other's needs in the cramped workspace they'd been allocated. Lily slept nearby on a makeshift bed, exhausted from days of constant fear and movement, finally feeling secure enough to truly rest. The reactor community watched their work with interest, some offering assistance or materials. Michael suspected they hoped his success might open a path for others to escape Tehran eventually. He didn't discourage this hope, though he knew the chance of anyone following their route was slim at best. In the evening, sitting by the community's central fire pit where meals were prepared and shared, Nora found a moment to speak privately with Michael. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows across their faces, creating an illusion of privacy in the communal space. "You risk everything for us," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Your life, your future. Why?" Michael was silent for a long moment, watching the fire consume the synthetic fuel blocks that served as the community's primary heat source. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory. "Because once someone risked everything for me." He shifted, uncomfortable with revealing even this much of himself. "My sister. She died getting me out of a situation I thought was inescapable." His hands tightened briefly into fists before deliberately relaxing. "I couldn't save her, but maybe I can balance the scales somehow." Nora didn't respond immediately, absorbing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. "Is that what we are to you? A chance for redemption?" "No," Michael answered, meeting her eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "You're people who deserve better than what Tehran offered you. That's enough reason." Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, a silent understanding passing between them before Michael looked away, returning his attention to the final preparations for their escape. They left at midnight when Terran's power usage dropped to its lowest point, creating the smallest drain on the grid. Sarah and two others from the community escorted them through a complex series of maintenance tunnels, eventually arriving at a massive vertical shaft that disappeared into darkness, both above and below. The scale of it was disorienting after days in confined spaces, a reminder of Terran's true size and the engineering that had created this underground world. The sectors they passed through were empty, abandoned years ago after structural integrity was compromised by a minor quake. But every sound echoed in the vast empty spaces, footsteps amplified into what seemed like armies marching, whispers returning as ghostly conversations from the darkness. Lily clung to Nora's hand, her eyes wide as she took in the enormous spaces, occasionally looking up at the distant ceiling, lost in shadow. At the base of the elevator shaft, Michael quickly located the ancient distribution panel. Decades of disuse had left it corroded and dust-covered, but the fundamental technology was familiar to him. He connected the power cells they'd brought, bridged damaged circuits with salvaged wire, bypassed security protocols using override codes he'd memorized years ago during his security training. His fingers moved with practiced precision despite the poor light, working largely by touch and memory. Lights flickered briefly along the shaft's interior as power returned to long-dormant systems. A low hum built gradually as machinery awakened from its extended sleep. The elevator platform itself was long gone, but the maintenance ladder running the length of the shaft remained intact. It would be a difficult climb, especially for Lily, but not impossible. Then an alarm triggered, a high-pitched wailing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Red warning lights began to pulse along the walls, casting the scene in a bloody glow. "Automated response," Sarah explained grimly, already raising her weapon. "The system registered unauthorized access. We have minutes, maybe less." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching security forces echoed through the tunnels leading to their position. The distinctive heavy tread of armored boots and the mechanical whir of combat drones. "Go," Sarah said, positioning herself and her companions to cover the main access point. "We'll hold them as long as we can. The community needs that data to reach the colonial authority as much as you do. Too many of us have suffered under Relcor." Michael hesitated, unwilling to leave them to what would likely be a suicide stand. Sarah met his eyes, her expression resolute. "This is our choice," she said firmly. Honor it by succeeding. He nodded once sharply before turning to help Nora and Lily begin their ascent up the ladder. The metal rungs were slick with condensation and occasionally corroded through, requiring careful testing before putting full weight on them. Nora went first, then Lily, with Michael following close behind, ready to catch the child if her strength failed. Gunfire erupted below as Sarah and her companions engaged the security forces. The sounds echoed up the shaft, creating a cacophony of violence that seemed to follow them as they climbed. Lily flinched at each burst but kept moving, her small hands gripping the rungs with determination. They had ascended perhaps 100 meters when a scream echoed up the shaft. Sarah's voice cut off abruptly. The gunfire intensified briefly, then diminished to sporadic bursts. Michael urged them to move faster, knowing the security forces would soon begin pursuit up the ladder. Nora's breath came in controlled gasps as she pushed herself to maintain the pace. Lily, despite her size, showed remarkable endurance, though Michael could see her arms trembling with effort as they continued their ascent. The shaft seemed endless, disappearing into darkness above, despite the lights that now functioned intermittently along its length. A deafening explosion rocked the shaft, the concussion wave slamming into them with physical force. Michael barely managed to maintain his grip on the ladder as debris rained past them, falling into the depths below. The security forces had apparently decided to bring down the entire access point rather than risk pursuit. "Hold on!" he shouted as aftershocks vibrated through the metal ladder. Sections below them tore free from the wall, creating a gap that would prevent any followers, but also cutting off their own retreat. They continued climbing, now committed irrevocably to their upward path. Time lost meaning in the monotonous movement, hand over hand, rung after rung, muscles burning with fatigue. Lily began to falter, her movements becoming sluggish. Without discussion, Nora and Michael adapted, creating a system where she would climb ahead, then secure herself and reach down to help lift Lily past her, with Michael supporting from below. After what seemed like hours, they reached a maintenance platform, a small metal grating extending from the shaft wall with another access panel. Michael checked their position against his mental map of Tehran's structure. "We're nearly there," he said, voice hoarse from exertion in the dry, metallic air of the shaft. "The port access should be 2 more levels up." Nora nodded, too exhausted for words. She sat on the grating, legs dangling over the abyss below, arms wrapped around Lily, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her small body limp with sleep despite their precarious position. The child's trust was absolute, secure in her mother's embrace even here. Michael worked quickly at the access panel, restoring power to the final section of their route. As systems came online, a security monitor flickered to life, showing the port level above. His heart sank at what he saw. Not the minimal security Sarah had predicted, but a full complement of guards and automated defense systems. Relcor had apparently anticipated this possible escape route. Worse, a familiar figure moved among the security personnel, giving directions and examining equipment. Trevor. "We have a problem," Michael said grimly, gesturing Nora closer to see the monitor. "My old friend sold us out." Nora's expression hardened as she recognized Trevor from their meeting in the hangar. "Is there another way?" Michael shook his head. "Not from here. We're committed." He checked his weapon, 3 rounds remaining. Not enough for a frontal assault. "I'll go first. Try to create a diversion. When you see an opening, run for the emergency shuttles." He pointed to a section of the monitor showing a row of small craft designed for evacuations. They're pre-programmed with basic navigation. Even without pilot training, you should be able to activate the emergency launch sequence. "And you?" Nora asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Michael didn't respond directly. "Take care of Lily, and make sure that data reaches someone who can use it." Before she could protest, he began climbing the final section of ladder. Each movement was measured, silent, years of training allowing him to move like a shadow despite his exhaustion. He reached the access hatch and paused, listening to the movements on the other side, timing patterns of patrol and conversation. With a deep breath, he forced the hatch open and emerged into chaos. Alarms immediately blared as automated systems detected the unauthorized access. Guards turned toward the disturbance, weapons raised. Michael fired his remaining rounds strategically, not at personnel, but at key systems. Power junctions sparked and exploded. Emergency containment doors began closing randomly as their control systems failed. The confusion was immediate and complete. He ducked behind a cargo container, narrowly avoiding the first wave of return fire. Bullets pinged off metal surfaces around him as he moved from cover to cover, drawing attention away from the access hatch where Nora would emerge with Lily. Through the chaos, he spotted Trevor standing near the emergency shuttles, shouting orders to the security personnel while simultaneously trying to override the shuttle bay doors that had begun closing automatically as part of the security response. Michael made his way toward him, using the confusion to approach unseen until he was nearly upon him. Trevor sensed his presence too late, turning just as Michael tackled him, sending them both crashing to the ground. They struggled briefly, Trevor reaching for a sidearm that Michael knocked away with a precise strike. "You set me up, friend," Trevor spat, blood trickling from a split lip. "What did you expect? Loyalty? In Terran?" He laughed bitterly. "Now I return the favor." Nora appeared from behind a row of containers, carrying a half-awake Lily. She froze at the sight of the confrontation, clearly torn between helping Michael and continuing toward the shuttles. "Give me the data, Michael," Trevor said, his voice suddenly reasonable, persuasive, and maybe they'll survive. Relcor wants the container more than they want 3 fugitives. You know how this works. For a moment, Michael appeared to consider the offer. His hand moved toward the container hidden beneath his jacket. Trevor's eyes followed the movement, his body relaxing slightly in anticipation of victory. It was the opening Michael needed. He threw the container, not to Trevor, but past him, skidding across the floor toward Nora. When Trevor instinctively turned to follow its path, Michael pushed him with all his remaining strength. Trevor stumbled backward, arms windmilling as he lost balance at the edge of an open technical hatch. A maintenance access point left open during the security team's hasty deployment. A look of surprise crossed Trevor's face as he fell, disappearing into the darkness below. A dull thud echoed up from the depths, followed by silence. Nora scooped up the container, securing it inside her tattered jacket, before continuing her dash toward the shuttles. Michael followed, providing cover as best he could without ammunition, using his knowledge of security protocols to trigger further system malfunctions that kept the guards disorganized. Sirens wailed throughout the port as they reached the emergency shuttle bay. The automated voice of Terran's security system announced containment protocols and threatened severe consequences for resistance. Guards regrouped, beginning a more coordinated approach toward the shuttle bay, their weapons fire becoming more focused and dangerous. Michael reached the nearest shuttle first, forcing open the manually access hatch and helping Nora and Lily inside. The craft was small, designed for short evacuation jumps rather than extended travel. But it would serve their purpose if they could launch before security disabled the bay doors completely. The shuttle's interior was Spartan, 6 acceleration couches, basic life support, and a simplified control interface designed to be operated by non-pilots in emergency situations. The displays flickered with warning messages as Michael activated the systems, bypassing security lockouts with override codes that still functioned from his security days. "Strap in," he ordered, helping secure Lily to the center couch, where protection from acceleration forces would be optimal. Nora took the couch beside her daughter, quickly figuring out the harness system. Bullets pinged against the shuttle's exterior as security forces reached the bay, taking up positions with clear lines of fire. The shuttle's hull was minimally armored, designed to withstand micro-debris in space, not concentrated weapons fire. A display flashed red, indicating a breach in the aft section. Michael worked frantically at the controls, initiating the emergency launch sequence while simultaneously trying to override the bay doors, which were now locked in a half-closed position, wide enough for the shuttle to pass through if precisely piloted, but with minimal margin for error. "We need to launch now," Nora said urgently, watching as the external camera showed guards setting up what appeared to be a heavy weapon, likely capable of disabling the shuttle completely. Michael pulled the main launch lever with force. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the shuttle's engines roared to life, the sudden acceleration pressing them back into their couches with crushing force. The craft shot forward toward the partially closed bay doors, scraping along both sides with a shriek of tortured metal. Warning alarms blared as external panels were torn away, but the structural integrity held. They broke free from the hangar, barely avoiding explosions behind them as security forces fired in desperation. On the display, a warning flashed. Fuel critical. The damage from their violent exit had ruptured one of the fuel lines, leaking precious propellant into space. Michael held course for the uninhabited planet Neon, close enough to reach with their limited fuel, far enough from Terran to avoid immediate pursuit. It was a desolate world, barely surveyed, of interest to neither Relcor nor the Colonial Authority due to its minimal resources and hostile environment. A good place to disappear. Lily sat pressed against her mother, small fingers intertwined with Nora's larger blue ones. Her eyes were fixed on the viewport, watching as Terran receded, becoming just another light among the stars. Nora stared out as well, her expression a complex mixture of relief and uncertainty about what lay ahead. Michael gripped the controls, his knuckles white with tension, as the shuttle began to shudder. The damage was worse than initially indicated, systems failing in cascading sequence as they pushed the craft beyond its design limits. They entered Neon's thin atmosphere at too steep an angle, the heat shield partially compromised, the cabin temperature rising dangerously. Warning messages flashed across every display, some failing entirely as power fluctuated. Michael fought for control, using every trick he'd learned during basic flight training, compensating manually for failing automated systems. The ground approached with terrifying speed, details of the barren landscape becoming visible. Vast deserts, rocky outcroppings, deep canyons carved by long-vanished water. "Hold on!" he shouted as they made final approach, the shuttle skimming a dune before slamming into the surface. Sand flew in all directions as they skidded across the desert floor, metal screaming as it was torn away by the impact. A support beam collapsed, narrowly missing Lily's couch. Sparks showered from ruptured electrical systems, small fires igniting briefly before the automatic suppressants activated. When the shuttle finally came to rest, tilted at an awkward angle half buried in sand, silence fell except for the hiss of escaping air and the ping of cooling metal. Michael released his harness with effort, body protesting after the violence of their landing. He checked Lily first, finding her shaken but unharmed, protected by both her harness and Nora's body, as her mother had somehow managed to partially shield her despite being strapped in herself. Nora had suffered a gash on her forehead, blue blood trickling down her face, but she waved away Michael's concern as she unbuckled herself and Lily. "We're alive," she said simply. "That's enough for now." They emerged from the shuttle into Nyane's harsh environment. The air was thin but breathable, tasting of dust and minerals. Twin suns blazed overhead in a sky the color of burnt copper, casting multiple shadows across the endless desert. Wind whipped sand into small funnels that danced across the dunes before dissipating. Temperature readings from the shuttle's external sensors had shown extreme variations. Blistering heat during day cycles, freezing cold when the sun set. Neon, a planet barely clinging to habitability. No indigenous complex life forms had been documented during initial surveys, only primitive mosses and lichen-like organisms in the deeper canyons where moisture occasionally collected. The surface was predominantly desert, broken by rock formations and dry riverbeds that suggested water had once flowed freely. They salvaged what they could from the shuttle: emergency rations, medical supplies, basic tools, and components that could be repurposed. Michael located the emergency beacon and deliberately disabled it, ensuring no signal would lead pursuers to their location. The shuttle itself was beyond repair, its systems too damaged for even temporary function. During their first exploration of the surrounding area, they discovered an unexpected feature: a small structure half buried in sand, approximately 2 kilometers from their crash site. Closer inspection revealed it to be an abandoned research outpost, likely established during Neon's initial survey decades ago and forgotten when the planet was deemed of little value. The bunker was simple but solid, reinforced walls designed to withstand Neon's occasional dust storms, basic life support systems long dormant but potentially salvageable, and a small array of solar collectors partially covered by years of accumulated sand. It would provide shelter, a base from which to establish their continued survival. Over the following weeks, they developed a routine. Michael worked on restoring the bunker systems, building a water filtration unit from components salvaged from the shuttle and the dormant equipment in the outpost. He connected salvaged power cells to the solar collectors, providing limited but crucial electricity for essential functions. His security training had included survival skills, knowledge he now applied with single-minded focus. Nora explored the surrounding terrain, mapping resources and potential hazards. She discovered patches of dry mosses growing near rocky outcroppings where morning condensation briefly provided moisture, harvesting them carefully to supplement their dwindling rations. Her medical knowledge proved invaluable as she identified which local organisms might be safely consumed and which were toxic. Lily, resilient in the way only children can be, adapted to their new environment with remarkable speed. She learned to catch small desert creatures, insect-like organisms that burrowed in the sand and emerged during the cooler periods. She developed an intuitive understanding of Neon's rhythms, often sensing approaching dust storms before the adults noticed changing pressure patterns. Her natural bioluminescence, a characteristic of her species that had been suppressed in Terranion's artificial environment, began to manifest in the darkness of Neon's nights, a soft blue glow that provided gentle illumination inside their shelter. They survived by combining their knowledge and adapting it to their harsh new home. The data container remained secure, hidden within the bunker's wall panel, its contents temporarily irrelevant to the more immediate concerns of survival. But its presence was a constant reminder of unfinished business, of a truth that still needed to reach the wider universe. Several months passed. Lily's laughter, once rare, became a common sound as she ran across the sand under Neon's golden evening sky, drawing patterns that the wind would erase by morning. She developed games involving the tracking of small creatures, collecting uniquely shaped stones, and predicting the patterns of dust devils that formed in the afternoon heat. Nora and Michael's relationship evolved gradually from wary cooperation to genuine trust, then to something deeper neither of them named directly. Their conversations, once limited to survival necessities, expanded to include memories of their lives before Relcor, hopes for Lily's future, and occasionally, in quiet moments when the child slept, tentative plans for their own. Nora looked at Michael one evening as they sat outside the bunker, watching the spectacular sunset paint the desert in shades of amber and gold. In her eyes was something more than gratitude, a recognition of the person he had become rather than the one he had been. He had learned to trust again, to see possibility beyond survival, to find moments of peace even in exile. But one day the peace was shattered. Lily, playing on a dune near their shelter, suddenly froze, her gaze fixed upward. Michael followed her line of sight and felt his blood run cold. Visible even in daylight were the contrails of multiple craft entering atmosphere, the distinctive pattern of Relcor Corporation starships. They had been found. How? Nora asked as they hurried inside, gathering only essential supplies: water, medical kit, the data container. We disabled all transmitters. There was nothing to track. Michael's expression was grim as he checked his makeshift weapons. A spear fashioned from shuttle debris, a knife created from scrap metal. Trevor, he must have placed a secondary tracker on me during our confrontation, something long-term, dormant until now. They watched from the bunker's small viewport as the ships landed on a flat expanse approximately 5 kilometers distant. Even at that range, they could see the deployment of ground vehicles and what appeared to be scanning equipment. The search would be methodical, expanding outward from the landing site. They had hours at most before discovery. Michael activated the old transmitter they had salvaged from the outpost and repaired for emergency use. The data container, the evidence of Relcor's crimes, the reason for their flight in exile, was their only remaining leverage. He connected it to the transmitter, preparing to broadcast its contents to any Colonial Authority frequencies still active in this sector of space. "Will anyone receive it?" Nora asked, watching his work while simultaneously packing supplies for Lily. "I don't know, Michael admitted. "We're far from established communications networks. But there's a chance a patrol ship might pick it up, or a trading vessel passing through the outer system. The signal will be weak, but the encryption will identify it as priority information. The transmitter's power reserves were limited. They would get one attempt." Michael initiated the transmission sequence, watching as the data began transferring to the broadcast buffer. The process was agonizingly slow, the ancient equipment struggling with the volume and complexity of the information. Outside, they could see dust clouds rising as Relcor vehicles began their search pattern, moving inexorably in their direction. Lily stood at the viewport, her small face solemn as she watched the approaching threat. "They won't stop looking for us, will they?" she asked, her first words about their situation since leaving Tehran. Michael crouched beside her, meeting her eyes directly. "No, but that doesn't mean they'll find us." The data transfer completed just as the first vehicles appeared on the horizon, distinctive black shapes against the golden sand. Michael made a final adjustment to the transmitter, setting it to broadcast continuously on a rotating frequency pattern to maximize the chance of detection. Nora held Lily close, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as she watched the approaching forces. "All this way," she whispered. "All this time." Michael moved to them, placing one hand on Lily's shoulder, the other briefly touching Nora's face in a gesture of reassurance. Then he turned to the bunker's main control panel, where he had connected the reactor's original emergency systems, an old power unit they had gradually restored over months of careful work. "There's another way," he said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. The bunker was designed with fail-safes. If breached, the power core would overload, creating a localized electromagnetic pulse. It won't hurt them, but it will disable their equipment temporarily. "And give us a chance to escape deeper into the desert," Nora finished, understanding his plan. Michael nodded, beginning the sequence that would trigger the controlled overload. There are cave systems in the northern canyons. We saw them during our exploration. If we can reach them before they recover." He didn't need to complete the thought. It was a desperate plan with minimal chance of success, but it offered more hope than surrender. The first Relcor forces reached the bunker perimeter, their vehicles creating dust clouds that reduced visibility to near zero. Commands echoed through amplification systems, ordering surrender and promising lenient treatment. Lies Michael recognized from protocols he himself had once helped establish. He connected the final contacts on the bunker reactor, initiating the overload sequence. Lights flickered throughout the shelter as power surged through systems never designed to handle such energy. The structure itself seemed to vibrate with the building charge. "Now!" Michael shouted, grabbing the emergency pack and pushing Nora and Lily toward the rear exit, a maintenance access point they had expanded into an escape route months earlier, just in case. The power built to critical levels behind them as they emerged into the blinding sunlight. A powerful explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet, not destructive but electromagnetic in nature, raising a massive dust storm that engulfed the Relcor forces. Electronic systems failed instantly. Vehicles stalled. Communications went silent. The confusion was complete. Michael led them away from the bunker, using the storm as cover, navigating by memory and instinct toward the distant canyons. They moved as quickly as possible through the swirling sand, each step carrying them further from their former shelter and the forces that had come to reclaim them. The journey was brutal, hours of trudging through shifting dunes, fighting against winds that tried to push them back, sand scouring any exposed skin. Lily stumbled frequently, eventually being carried by Michael while Nora forged ahead, creating a path through the worst of the storm. Their water supplies dwindled dangerously, each precious sip rationed with increasing care. When they finally reached the canyon's edge, the storm was beginning to subside. They paused briefly, looking back toward where they had come from. In the distance, they could see Relcor forces regrouping, vehicles becoming operational again as systems recovered from the electromagnetic pulse. The pursuit would resume soon. They descended into the canyon using natural formations as a makeshift path. The temperature dropped noticeably as they moved deeper into shadow, the air becoming marginally more humid. Vegetation appeared, sparse but present, clinging to rock walls where seeping moisture created microenvironments. Lily touched these plants with wonder, having seen nothing green since leaving Tehran. The cave systems were extensive, winding through the canyon walls like arteries through living tissue. They chose a path that led deeper, following the sound of what might have been water dripping in the distance. The darkness became nearly complete, relieved only by Lily's natural bioluminescence, which cast a soft blue glow around them. They found a chamber deep within the cave network, large enough to serve as temporary shelter, with a small pool of water formed by condensation and mineral seepage. Michael established basic security measures, early warning systems created from loose stones arranged at tunnel entrances, alternative escape routes identified and marked. Hours passed as they waited in tense silence, listening for sounds of pursuit. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them, sleep coming in fitful bursts interrupted by startling awake at imagined noises. Lily slept between Nora and Michael, their bodies forming a protective barrier around her even in unconsciousness. Morning brought no light to their underground sanctuary, but their bodies' internal rhythms roused them nonetheless. Michael ventured cautiously toward the cave entrance, expecting to find Relcor forces establishing a search perimeter. Instead, he found nothing, no vehicles on the horizon, no sounds of machinery or voices. Confusion gave way to cautious hope as hours passed with no sign of pursuers. Had they lost interest? Deemed the effort not worth the resources? It seemed unlikely given Relcor's characteristic persistence. That evening, risking discovery, they climbed to a high point on the canyon rim to gain better perspective. What they saw explained the absence of pursuit. The Relcor ships were gone from the landing site, leaving only flattened sand and scattered equipment as evidence they had been there at all. "I don't understand," Nora said, scanning the horizon as if expecting a trap. "They wouldn't just leave." Michael's expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization. The transmission. Someone received it. The data got through. He laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. Relcor's being called to account elsewhere. They can't afford to waste resources hunting 3 fugitives when their entire operation might be under investigation. It was a theory based on hope as much as evidence. But in the days that followed, no pursuit materialized. They returned cautiously to the bunker, finding it damaged but salvageable. The transmitter was destroyed, its purpose fulfilled, but other systems could be repaired or rebuilt. They never received confirmation that the data had reached the Colonial Authority or what consequences had befallen Relcor. News didn't reach Neon, a forgotten world orbiting a distant star, valuable only to the 3 individuals who now called it home. Years passed. Lily grew tall and strong, her natural resilience complemented by skills learned through survival. She ran across the sand under Neon's golden sky, her blue skin darkened to a deep indigo by constant exposure to sunlight, her silver hair flowing behind her. She had developed an intimate knowledge of their small territory, where water might be found after rare rainfall, which canyon paths led to patches of edible vegetation. How to predict the massive dust storms that occasionally transform the landscape. Michael and Nora watched her from the threshold of their rebuilt shelter, their hands occasionally touching, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of shared experience. The bunker had been expanded, improved, transformed from a survival necessity to something resembling a home. Solar collectors salvaged and repaired from the research outpost provided reliable power. Gardens of native vegetation flourished in protected enclosures, supplementing their diet. A rudimentary communication system monitored frequencies, though it had never detected anything beyond background radiation. They knew they had survived not because of a miracle, but because of willpower, ingenuity, and the decision not to betray themselves or each other when easier paths had presented themselves. The horizon remained empty of threats or salvation, offering instead the simple freedom of a life built entirely on their own terms. In time, they stopped watching the skies for signs of pursuit or rescue. Neon, once their prison, had become their sanctuary. And in the harshest of environments, they had found not merely survival, but a kind of peace that had eluded them in the supposed civilization they had fled.